They arrived before midnight, creeping through maze-like alleys and back streets, engines hushed like ghosts, tires sliding over wet pavement. The sky above Mazatlán was low and heavy, the moon hidden by thin streaks of cloud, the sea behind the city murmuring secrets to the shore. Most windows were closed. Lights dimmed. Birds long gone. And yet, beneath the hush, something trembled, a tension so slight you thought it might be a dream. But dreams don't end in sirens. In a beachfront apartment, fluorescent light flickered on peeling walls. A family sat huddled, grandmother murmuring prayers, children pressed to an older sibling's chest, while a fan spun lethargic circles overhead. Outside, the hum of traffic had almost ceased, as though the city was holding its breath. One man looked out the window, saw headlights across the bay, small points of light approaching like stars fallen to earth. Elsewhere, at a cafe near the Malecon, waiters wiped down tables, tourists lingered over late dinners, beers and seafood paella. Someone laughed. Music drifted over the sea breeze. A local musician strummed his guitar on a balcony above, notes hanging in the air. It was a night like many others, except that somewhere, hidden, decisions had already been made, alliances sealed in silence, betrayals recruited in shadows. Two SUVs parked in the cover of palm trees by a side road. Men in coats stepped out, their faces obscured by scarves. One checked his watch, its face catching moonlight. A phone buzzed. A message flashed, Listo en cinco. 5 minutes. Then another, La zona está limpia? Is the zone clear? Quiet affirmation came in another message, Sí, todo limpio. Calm on the surface, chaos underneath. Along Highway 15, big rigs rolled past in the dark, their cargo secure and heavy. Drivers kept their cabs lit so faintly their own eyes ached. Somewhere in the valley of hills beyond city lights, radio static crackled. There, in whispered frequencies, plans were relayed, coordinates, names, times. The sender and receiver separated by nothing but distance, secrecy, and a shared readiness to act. Back in the city's heart, an abandoned warehouse door creaked open. Inside, flashlights revealed outlines of rifles, ammo crates stacked against concrete. Men in dark boots shuffled, maps laid across folding tables, lines drawn in chalk, marking roads, checkpoints, vulnerable sites. One map was centered on the coastal zones, the port, the Malecon, places tourists would never suspect could become war zones. Then, a low rumble, at first mistaken for thunder, then understood as something else, engines revving, trucks starting, guards checking gear. The rumble rolled through streets, shaking windows. Dogs barked in some neighborhoods, someone closed shutters, locked doors, pressed a hand over a child humming in sleep. The rumble moved, advanced. At exactly 9:37 p.m., at a street corner 3 blocks from the ocean promenade, the first sharp crack broke the air, not far, too loud to deny it. Then another, echoing off buildings, then others, a cascade. Bullets splintering wood, smashed glass raining down. A car skidded. People dove for cover, some screamed, others stood frozen, phone lights trembling in hands. In that moment, everything divided, before the gunfire, and after. In a surveillance camera's blink, masked men spilled from pickups, weapons raised, silhouettes slicing through darkness. Overhead, a drone word, unseen, recording. One witness, pinned behind a wall, smelled gunpowder, saw sparks and smoke, heard someone shout in broken Spanish, Agacate, al suelo. Another voice answered, Quiénes, donde? But there was no answer, only bullets. By 10:03 p.m., the map of Mazatlán had been rewritten in blood and noise. Streets once alive with music and laughter were marked by smoldering car parts. Ambulances wailed, tires screeched, footsteps pounded pavement, edges of voices choking with shock. News spreads in moments, neighbor phones neighbor, someone records video of horrors in the distance, a body lies in the gutter, the phone beside it showing last messages, Estoy bien, ¿llegaste? I'm okay. Did you arrive? And then, silence. The kind that hurts your ears because it's too heavy to be real. Smoke lingered above rooftops. Somewhere offshore, a ship's horn cried into the dark, long and hollow. For the people of Mazatlán, it was the sound of a city forever changed, the night when paradise learned to bleed, and the world realized the war that never left Culiacán had finally reached the coast.
You are watching True Crime Cartel Originals. Before we dive into today's story, I've got one small favor to ask. If you love deep, real stories like this, tap the like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment below telling us which city you're watching from. It helps more than you know, and it allows us to keep bringing you stories no one else dares to tell. Now, let's get into the story.
Mazatlán, the pearl of the Pacific, sits like a jewel pressed against the blue heart of Mexico's western coast, a city that breathes in rhythm with the ocean and hides its secrets behind a smile. In daylight, it feels like freedom itself, the sun bleeding gold over white beaches, marlin boats gliding across the horizon, and laughter floating through the Malecón where vendors sell ice-cold coconuts to tourists who think they've found paradise. But behind that postcard perfection, behind the waves and music and tequila glow, there is another Mazatlán, one that doesn't appear on travel brochures, one that beats to the quiet rhythm of engines idling in the dark, of men who move without names, and of streets that never forget what they've seen. To understand Mazatlán is to understand contradiction, a place where beauty and brutality share the same sunrise, where the sea carries both fishermen and smugglers, and where every wave that crashes on the sand could just as easily hide a shipment as a secret. For decades, this city has been more than a tourist escape, it's been a gateway, a strategic artery in the vast and bloody network that feeds an empire of narcotics stretching from the mountains of Sinaloa to the ports of California. Mazatlán's geography isn't just beautiful, it's useful. Every coastal road, every hidden cove, every shipment leaving its harbor tells the same story: control this city, and you control the ocean's doorway. But the kind of power that flows through Mazatlán isn't written in government documents or business contracts, it's whispered in back rooms, sealed with nods, and enforced with silence. The people here have learned how to live between two realities, one ruled by laws, and another by fear. To outsiders, the city feels alive, festive, endless. But for the locals, the fishermen, the taxi drivers, the street vendors, the waitresses, survival depends on instinct. They know which neighborhoods to avoid, which names to never mention, and which questions to never ask. In Mazatlán, ignorance isn't weakness, it's armor. Every cartel map has invisible borders, territories drawn not by pen or paper, but by gunfire and fear. In the shadows of Mazatlán, those borders blur and bleed. There are factions whose loyalty bends like the tide, splinters of a once united empire, each one fighting to claim the same legacy. The old guard, men who remember the quieter years when deals were made over coffee instead of crossfire, still cling to power. And then there are the young ones, impulsive, wired, armed to the teeth, men who've never known peace, only war. To them, violence isn't a tragedy, it's tradition. And yet, amid all this, life goes on. Every morning, fishermen push their boats out before sunrise, chasing tuna beneath skies still heavy with the ghosts of last night's gunfire. Kids run to school with backpacks bouncing, pretending not to notice the military trucks parked at the intersections. Tourists sip margaritas on hotel balconies, oblivious to the black SUVs that pass beneath them, windows tinted, occupants unseen. In Mazatlán, normal isn't the absence of danger. It's the ability to live with it, to dance beside it, to smile while pretending not to hear the thunder rumbling behind the music. But something has shifted in the air, a subtle tremor that even the sea seems to feel. For days, locals have whispered about convoys seen moving along the northern highway, unmarked trucks rolling past the tolls without stopping, men in black fatigues standing watch at rural crossroads. The soldiers stationed near the port are restless, their radios alive with static and coded chatter. Nobody knows for sure what's coming, but everyone can sense it, the way animals sense a storm before it breaks. The question isn't if something will happen, it's when. By morning, those rumors have turned into certainty. A fisherman swears he saw men loading crates onto boats before dawn, not fishing gear, but weapons. A taxi driver says he drove a stranger with a rifle case who spoke no words. A shopkeeper claims her phone picked up strange radio signals all night. And as the sun climbs higher, the city's heartbeat feels off, faster, unsteady, as though Mazatlán itself is holding its breath. There's no music in the plazas, no laughter on the boardwalk. Even the ocean seems quieter, waiting. That afternoon, the messages begin to spread, not through the news, but through whispers, through WhatsApp chats, through the kind of word of mouth that moves faster than any bullet. Stay home tonight. Don't go near the port. Something's happening. For a city that lives between rumor and reality, nobody knows which to believe, but everyone locks their doors anyway. Shopkeepers close early. Streets empty before dark. The skyline turns from gold to red to black, and somewhere out there, in the spaces between silence, engines begin to start. Then comes the call. One police dispatcher, voice trembling, sends out a coded alert, possible convoy movement near Avenida del March. Another responds, multiple vehicles, armed. A third transmission cuts off mid-sentence. And in that instant, the city changes. Every streetlight seems brighter, every sound sharper. People peer from windows, dogs bark without reason, and somewhere deep inside Mazatlán, the sound of engines rises like a heartbeat, steady, growing, unstoppable. And then, silence. The kind that feels alive, heavy, electric, the breath the world takes before it screams. Somewhere in the dark, a single gun is loaded. Somewhere else, a convoy turns off its headlights. And by nightfall, that rumor will become a gunfight. As the last sliver of daylight vanished beyond the Pacific, Mazatlán began to feel like a city trapped between worlds, one that didn't know whether it was still alive or already haunted. The streets, once buzzing with cars and laughter, were now washed in the sickly orange glow of street lamps that flickered against empty sidewalks. The wind carried a sound that wasn't quite silence, a faint mechanical hum, the whisper of engines somewhere far away. In the distance, the ocean roared as if it knew something the rest of the city didn't. And for the people who hadn't fled indoors, there was a single, unspoken truth in the air: something was coming, and it would not stop. At 8:42 p.m., a woman named Rosa, a shopkeeper who lived above her store near Avenida del Mar, made a phone call to her sister. Her voice, captured later in police transcripts, trembled as she described what she saw. There are trucks without plates, 5, maybe 6. They're not stopping. They have men in black, helmets, rifles. Her sister told her to lock the doors. But Rosa couldn't. She stayed by the window, phone shaking in her hand, listening to the sound of engines echoing through the narrow streets. They're driving like they own the city, she whispered. Like no one can stop them. Across town, in a command center filled with static and fatigue, a police dispatcher stared at a glowing map dotted with red signals. His headset crackled, units reporting movement on the coastal road, 10 vehicles, unmarked, heavy weapons visible. Another voice cut in, do not engage. I repeat, do not engage. But even as those words were spoken, the sound of gunfire, faint, distant, almost accidental, echoed through the radio, followed by silence. No one spoke. The dispatcher reached for his coffee, but his hand wouldn't stop shaking. Somewhere in that silence, everyone in the room understood, this wasn't just a patrol. It was a message. CCTV footage from a gas station later recovered by authorities shows the moment fear became reality. At 9:12 p.m., 3 black pickup trucks roll in, lights off, windows tinted, engines idling. A man steps out, his face hidden under a balaclava, his movements precise and unhurried. He walks to the back of the truck, opens the tailgate, and lifts out something long and wrapped in cloth. Behind him, others do the same. Then, in one smooth, chilling motion, they unwrap the objects, revealing assault rifles that gleam under the fluorescent lights. Within seconds, the men are gone, leaving only tire marks, spilled gasoline, and a cashier trembling behind bulletproof glass. Meanwhile, on social media, the city's fear found its voice. Leaked WhatsApp messages began to spread like wildfire, grainy photos of armed convoys, screenshots of voice notes saying don't go outside, stay off Avenida del Mar, they're moving south. Some were real. Most were not. But truth didn't matter anymore. Panic had its own rhythm, and it beat faster than any fact. On TikTok, a short clip, headlights racing down an empty street, hit 500,000 views within minutes, tagged #Mazatlán night. Nobody knew who filmed it. Nobody wanted to. By 9:20 p.m., the military checkpoint outside the city reported movement, trucks approaching from both the north and the inland highway. The commanding officer ordered his men to hold position, but the soldiers were tense, their fingers twitching on the triggers. Radio chatter filled the air like electricity. 2 trucks. No, 4. Wait, more coming. Then, silence again. One soldier, too young to hide his fear, whispered, "It's like they're everywhere." Another replied, "They are." Inside the city, confusion deepened. Some said the men were after a rival faction, others said it was a message to the government. Nobody agreed on the details, only the fear. Journalists called police spokesmen and got no answers. Reporters whispered in parking lots, staring at the horizon where flashes of light began to bloom, faint, then sharper, then unmistakable. The storm was almost here. The first drops of rain began to fall, hitting rooftops like the ticking of a countdown. Somewhere in the chaos, a lone radio operator picked up an open transmission, a deep voice, calm and cold, "All units in position. Wait for the signal." The operator froze, hand hovering over the switch. Another voice cut in, "What signal?" But there was no answer. Just the hum of static and the low rumble of approaching engines. At that moment, across the city, lights flickered. For a heartbeat, Mazatlán went dark, streetlights, traffic signals, entire neighborhoods swallowed by blackness. Then, as the power surged back, it brought with it a sound that shattered the stillness. Not thunder. Not fireworks. Something sharper. Heavier. Final. And then, at exactly 9:37 p.m., it began. It started with a sound that didn't belong, a metallic pop that cracked through the coastal air, cutting cleanly through the hum of the city like a warning shot from the heavens. Then came another, sharper, closer. In seconds, that quiet rhythm of the ocean was replaced by the thunder of automatic gunfire echoing through the empty streets. The city that had been holding its breath for hours finally exhaled, in panic, in confusion, in terror. Windows shattered, alarms wailed, and somewhere deep within Mazatlán's heart, the war that had been promised finally arrived. At 9:38 p.m., reports flooded the radio frequencies faster than anyone could process. Multiple armed units exchanging fire near the port. Shots fired on Avenida del March. Officer down, requesting backup. Voices overlapped, collided, dissolved into chaos. The control room became a storm of noise, clattering keyboards, shouts, gunfire leaking through distant microphones. Outside, soldiers scrambled into armored trucks, headlights slicing through the smoke. They didn't know who was shooting at whom, only that Mazatlán had become a battlefield, and every shadow looked like an enemy. Down by the marina, a family of 4 huddled in their kitchen, the lights out, the mother holding her children as the sound of gunfire rolled over the city like thunder over water. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her voice breaking. Through the cracks in the blinds, flashes of light painted the walls, orange, red, white, as if the night itself was on fire. The father gripped a kitchen knife, useless against the sound outside, but it made him feel like he could protect them. When one bullet hit the metal gate out front, the children screamed, and the father whispered, "It's okay." But it wasn't. Not anymore. From the opposite side of town, a journalist live-streamed from a rooftop, voice trembling as she narrated what she saw. "There's smoke near the port. I can hear gunfire, they're moving through the streets." Her phone cut off as tracer rounds zipped overhead, leaving streaks of red light like falling stars. For a brief moment, her camera caught it all, convoys of black trucks weaving through the avenues, soldiers ducking behind walls, the air thick with smoke and sparks. The video went viral within minutes, watched by millions who would never understand the silence that followed each burst of sound. At 9:45 p.m., the cartel convoy reached the naval base perimeter. Security forces responded, unleashing a wave of firepower that turned the intersection into a war zone. Shell casings rained like metal rain, tracer fire carved red lines across the night, and explosions shook the glass in nearby hotels. Guests screamed, diving for cover behind marble counters as chandeliers trembled overhead. The battle wasn't just heard, it was felt, in the bones, in the chest, in the air that now smelled like smoke and gasoline. Through all the chaos, there were moments of haunting stillness. A police officer crouched behind his cruiser, hand pressed against his radio, whispering, "I've lost my partner." The voice on the other end replied, "Hold your position." The officer stared into the dark street, gun trembling, eyes wide. "He's not moving," he said, voice cracking. "He's just lying there." Rain began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, mixing with the smoke. The officer tilted his head back and whispered, "God help us," before reloading. Inside one of the black trucks, a young gunman reloaded his rifle, his hands slick with sweat. He couldn't be more than 20. His heartbeat pounded louder than the shots outside. Through the window, he saw movement, shadows flickering between palm trees. He didn't know if they were enemies, soldiers, or his own. "Move," someone yelled. He hit the gas, tires screeching, bullets sparking off the asphalt. The convoy tore through the boulevard like lightning, leaving behind only shattered glass and the echo of death. As midnight approached, the storm reached its peak. The gunfire echoed from the port to the hills, each shot bouncing off the narrow streets like a scream trapped in a maze. Fires burned unchecked, a truck engulfed in flames near the plaza, a bus smoldering on its side, a power line sparking in the rain. But amid the chaos, there were moments of courage too, a paramedic crawling through debris to reach a wounded officer, a stranger pulling a child to safety behind a stalled taxi. Even in the darkness, there were flickers of light, faint, fragile, human. By 2 a.m., the gunfire began to fade, replaced by the sound of rain and distant engines retreating into the Black Hills. The city was still, but not quiet. Sirens wailed, glass crunched under boots, and the smell of smoke hung heavy in the humid air. Soldiers moved cautiously through the streets, flashlights cutting across bullet-riddled walls. A journalist later described it as a silence that didn't feel like peace, it felt like the eye of the storm. And then, as the sky began to turn gray, the full weight of the night revealed itself. Burned vehicles still smoldered in intersections. Stray dogs wandered through pools of rainwater reflecting red and blue lights. Families emerged slowly from their homes, eyes wide, stepping into a city they barely recognized. Every wall carried scars, bullet holes, soot, silence. The sunrise did not bring relief. It only exposed what the darkness had hidden. By dawn, Mazatlán was unrecognizable. When dawn finally arrived, Mazatlán looked less like a city and more like a memory, streets glistening with rain, smoke curling lazily above burned-out cars, and soldiers moving cautiously through the debris like men walking through someone else's nightmare. The sun didn't rise in gold that morning, it rose in ash. Reporters crowded the edges of the barricades, microphones trembling in their hands, asking questions no one dared to answer. Every sound, a dropped shell casing, a shutter click, a distant siren, carried the weight of what had happened only hours before. By mid-morning, the city was crawling with federal agents, investigators, and journalists from every corner of the country. Crime scene tape stretched like veins through intersections, marking the places where bullets had spoken louder than words. The smell of burnt fuel and metal still lingered in the humid air. Forensic teams in white suits crouched over shell casings and shattered windshields, cataloging fragments of a night no one would ever fully understand. But beneath the surface of official reports and televised press conferences, there was another story taking shape, one that didn't fit neatly into the government's version of events. The first official statement came at 11 a.m., broadcast live from the governor's office. A spokesman, pale and shaking, read from a prepared sheet. He said the confrontation had been a coordinated response to a criminal threat, that no civilians were harmed, and that order had been restored. But those words clashed violently with the images now flooding social media, videos of explosions, of stray bullets striking storefronts, of terrified families hiding behind overturned tables. Order was a word that meant nothing anymore. To the people who lived it, the night felt like war. In neighborhoods near the port, survivors began to speak, quietly, anonymously, through reporters who promised to protect their names. They described things that didn't match the timeline. Trucks that arrived hours before the supposed engagement. Soldiers who seemed to already know where to aim. They were waiting, one witness said. It wasn't random. It was planned. Another added, they came for someone. But no one knew who that someone was, or why the whole city had to burn for it. Investigators followed the evidence, bullet trajectories, tire tracks, radio logs. They pieced together fragments from security cameras, phones, and eyewitness accounts. What they found painted a story more complicated than any press release: multiple armed groups moving through the city in coordination, some dressed like soldiers, others wearing insignias that didn't match any known faction. They were too organized to be random, one investigator admitted off record. And too fast to be caught. Leaked documents began to surface days later, fragments of military briefings, intercepted messages, internal memos stamped confidential. They hinted at something larger, a struggle for power within the very organization meant to protect Mazatlán. One report mentioned a high-value target extraction. Another referenced internal coordination failures. In plain language, someone tipped someone off. The gunfight wasn't an accident, it was an execution. But even as the pieces began to form a pattern, the narrative twisted again. Officials denied knowledge of the leaked files, claiming they were fabricated by online agitators. Meanwhile, local reporters who pursued the story began receiving anonymous messages: "Stop digging. You're being watched." One journalist's car was found abandoned outside town, his phone smashed, his laptop missing. The line between truth and danger had vanished, leaving only the faint hum of fear in its place. For the families who lived through that night, justice became just another rumor. Some said the military covered up its mistakes. Others said the gunfight was between rival cartel factions, a message disguised as a battle. What everyone agreed on was simple: no one was telling the whole truth. Each interview, each official report, each statement contradicted the last. The truth was buried somewhere beneath the rubble, sealed under silence and signatures. Weeks later, a federal commission quietly released its findings. The report claimed that the violence was the result of cartel infighting. But the data didn't match the timeline. Eyewitnesses insisted that some of the trucks bore military plates. And somewhere in those contradictions, in those carefully chosen words and missing files, something far darker began to emerge: whispers of an inside deal, a betrayal, a name no one dared to say aloud. Someone sold out the city, a source said. And the gunfight was just the cover. But in the sea of silence and denial, one voice remained: a survivor. A man who had seen everything, who had lost everything, but who carried something the government didn't know he had: proof. Proof that could unravel the entire story, proof that could show who really orchestrated the night Mazatlán burned. He had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, or maybe the right one. And when he finally came forward, the truth would shake everything. Because one survivor had proof, and it would change everything. It started with a voice, shaky, low, and nearly broken. The man who had once stayed hidden for months finally spoke, not to the press or the police, but into a recorder inside a small, windowless motel room on the city's outskirts. His voice trembled as he told the story no one else dared to. He had worked for one of the security units that responded that night. But what he revealed turned the entire official narrative inside out. "It wasn't supposed to happen here," he whispered. "It was supposed to look like something else." According to his testimony, the gunfight wasn't a sudden clash between rival groups, it was an operation gone wrong. He said a deal had been arranged days earlier, deep in the shadows between powerful figures, government insiders, cartel negotiators, and intermediaries who blurred the line between law and crime. A promise had been made, a safe passage for someone high up, someone too valuable to lose. But the money changed hands too soon, and the wrong side got wind of it. When the convoy rolled in that night, both sides thought they were being double-crossed. The firefight wasn't chaos. It was revenge. Investigators traced the whistleblower's account back to encrypted messages and intercepted calls from the days before the shooting. The files told the same story, coded references to a transfer, orders to clear the zone, and one chilling phrase, "Make it loud." That line repeated over and over across multiple transmissions. Make it loud. It was never meant to be quiet. It was meant to be heard, a statement, a show of force, a warning to anyone watching that the balance of power in Mazatlán had changed overnight. But beneath the politics and betrayals lay something quieter, something human. Families who had lost their sons, mothers who still woke to the sound of phantom gunfire. For them, the investigation wasn't about power or corruption, it was about closure. They said my boy was in the wrong place, one mother told a reporter, her voice barely steady. But it's the city that's wrong, not him. She held up a photo, a smiling teenager in a soccer jersey, and behind her, the ruins of her neighborhood stood like ghosts that refused to leave. Reporters who followed the whistleblower's claims discovered something far darker: payments routed through offshore accounts, military logs edited after the fact, and the mysterious disappearance of radio recordings from the night of the attack. Each revelation peeled back another layer of deceit until it became clear, the gunfight was never about territory or drugs alone. It was about control, control of information, control of narrative, and control of fear. Whoever held those, held Mazatlán. Then came the tapes. Secret recordings smuggled out of the city, featuring voices that should never have been heard. One was a senior official giving the order to contain the situation, moments before the shooting started. Another was a familiar voice, the same man who had denied everything on television. His calm tone cracked halfway through the recording, replaced by panic. "We've lost control," he said. "They're shooting back." Those tapes spread online within hours, unstoppable. The truth was no longer theirs to bury. But even as the recordings went viral, the whistleblower vanished. One day he was in protective custody, the next, gone. His motel room stripped bare, his belongings missing, his name erased from all official logs. Authorities said he had fled. Locals said otherwise. They said he had been silenced. That silence hung heavy over Mazatlán, heavier than the gunfire that once filled its streets. It was proof that even the truth, when too loud, becomes a target. In the weeks that followed, officials scrambled to rewrite history. Statements were edited, files sealed, and news anchors spoke in careful tones about ongoing investigations. But among the people, truth spread like wildfire, whispered in markets, shared through anonymous posts, replayed on phones under flickering streetlights. It wasn't the kind of truth that appeared in headlines. It lived in the spaces between fear and defiance. Mazatlán had seen the cost of silence, and it would never forget the sound of its own heartbeat in the dark. The families of the victims began demanding justice, holding candlelight vigils in the plaza where the first shots were fired. Photos lined the fountain, each one illuminated by trembling flames. "We want names," they chanted softly. "We want truth." Their grief turned into resistance, not loud, not violent, but relentless. For every lie told on camera, another candle appeared in the square. Light against darkness. Memory against erasure. And when the final report was released, months later, signed and sealed by men who had never stepped foot in those streets, it concluded that no conclusive evidence linked the government to the operation. The document ended where the truth began, in silence. But those who lived it knew better. They knew the fire hadn't started from nowhere. It had been lit by greed, betrayal, and power. And though the city began to heal, one final truth remained, whispered only among those who had seen everything. Because even after the truth came out, the story wasn't over. When the gunfire finally ceased and the smoke thinned into the horizon, Mazatlán stood still, not in peace, but in exhaustion. The city that had once been known for its music, its beaches, its laughter, now echoed only with sirens and silence. Streets once filled with the smell of tacos and ocean breeze were replaced by the metallic scent of fear. Neighbors didn't greet each other anymore, they nodded quietly, eyes searching for answers that no one could give. The city wasn't rebuilding, it was relearning how to breathe. In the weeks that followed, funerals became part of the city's rhythm. Black veils replaced Sunday hats, and the sound of hymns echoed between the same walls that had once heard the chaos of bullets. Soldiers stood at intersections like silent statues, while families carried framed photos down narrow streets. Each name read at the cemetery carried the weight of a question: why did they die, and for whom? The truth had been exposed, but justice had never arrived. Local reporters tried to keep the story alive. They wrote late into the night, publishing under pseudonyms, using VPNs to protect their IP addresses. But every article they posted vanished hours later, flagged as inaccurate or harmful to public security. The more they spoke, the more they were erased. One journalist described it best: they took the noise away, but left the silence. It wasn't censorship, it was suffocation. Slowly, the city began to change, not just its skyline, but its soul. New walls rose where old ones had fallen, businesses reopened with fresh paint over bullet holes, and people tried to pretend normalcy had returned. But it wasn't the same Mazatlán anymore. The laughter felt rehearsed. The streets felt cautious. Every motorcycle passing at night made hearts race a little faster. Fear had become a part of the city's architecture. Politically, alliances shifted. New leaders emerged with promises of transparency, while old faces disappeared quietly into retirement or exile. Funding flowed into reconstruction projects, but locals whispered that the same hands signing the checks were the ones that had ordered the shooting. Mazatlán became a city run not by trust, but by memory. Everyone knew something had happened, something too big to erase, yet too dangerous to name aloud. For those who lost someone, the aftermath was not counted in headlines or investigations. It was measured in nights without sleep, in chairs that stayed empty, in conversations that ended mid-sentence. Children asked why their fathers didn't come home, mothers had no words left to give. The gunfight had taken more than lives, it had taken the illusion of safety. The sound of a backfiring car or fireworks would send entire families ducking under tables. The trauma didn't fade, it adapted. Meanwhile, the whistleblowers' recordings continued to surface online, bit by bit. Each file brought another truth, not new enough to reopen the case, but strong enough to remind people of what really happened. Activists began to meet secretly, determined to keep the memory alive. They called it La Voz del Silencio, the voice of the silence. It wasn't a movement of anger, but of endurance. If justice wouldn't speak, they would whisper it forever. Years later, Mazatlán tried to market itself again, travel ads showing its beaches, its sunsets, its music festivals. Tourists came, unaware of what the sand still remembered. Locals smiled for the cameras, but behind every grin was a ghost. Because beneath the postcards and the slogans, the real Mazatlán still pulsed, a city that had once been silenced by its own protectors and still carried that scar beneath its skin. And when the journalists, the survivors, and the mothers of the lost gathered years later on the anniversary of the gunfight, they didn't hold banners or march. They simply stood together at the site where it began, the intersection now paved smooth, as if nothing had ever happened. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. In the quiet, the truth was louder than any siren or headline. It was the kind of silence that doesn't ask for attention, it demands remembrance. And as the narrator's voice fades, the camera drifts upward, above the streets, above the lights, above the city that still breathes despite everything. Because in Mazatlán, the gunfire may have ended, but the echoes remain. They live in the whispers of fishermen, in the footsteps on cracked pavement, in the cautious laughter of children born after the fire. The bullets stopped that night. But the silence that followed was louder than anything else. The screen fades to black, and then, softly, the names begin to appear. Not the ones from news headlines or police reports, but the ones never spoken aloud, the street vendors, the taxi drivers, the mothers, the children who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. The narrator's voice lowers to almost a whisper, carrying a weight that no words should have to bear. Because behind every statistic, there was a heartbeat, and behind every gunshot, a story that ended too soon. A few lines of text glide onto the screen, official investigations remain ongoing. No arrests have been confirmed. then another. Government officials decline to comment. The narrator exhales audibly before continuing, the pause itself saying more than any sentence could. They promised justice, the voice says slowly, but what they delivered was silence. The truth didn't die in Mazatlán that night, it was buried, beneath bureaucracy and fear. But somewhere, someone still remembers. An investigator who refused to look away. A journalist who still checks anonymous inboxes at midnight. A mother who still sets an extra plate at dinner, just in case her son walks through the door. These people don't seek fame or vengeance, they seek acknowledgement that the world has not forgotten what happened when the lights went out in Mazatlán. As the piano swells beneath the narration, the final montage plays, scenes of the ocean washing against the shore, children running on sand that once echoed with sirens, fishermen casting nets into calm water as if trying to pull the past from beneath the waves. And over it all, the voice returns, steady, measured, and filled with quiet conviction. How many more stories like this will Mazatlán hide, before the world finally listens? If you believe their story deserves to be remembered, don't let it end here. Share this video, leave a comment, and keep their names alive. The more people know, the harder it becomes for history to repeat itself. Subscribe for more true stories the world tried to bury, because silence protects no one.